Hi, it's Mr. Lawrence, and this is the sixth day of videos for the Civil War. And in our last video, we talked about the Battle of Gettysburg, which was this huge climax of the war, right smack dab in the middle of it, where it's the largest battle ever to take place in the Western Hemisphere, and you have almost a couple 150,000 soldiers total fighting each other, and the Confederates launched this massive attack, which the Union are able to hold off. And it's called, or nicknamed, the high water mark, because from then it's downhill for the Confederacy. Today, we want to talk about one of the misconceptions. The war is not just fought over in the East Coast. Although the battles we've talked about so far, Bull Run, Peninsula, Antietam, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, Gettysburg, they've been all over on the East Coast. There are battles taking place around the country. And today we're going to talk about the war in the West. So it's something called the Western Theater. So the Civil War is not just fought in the East. It's also fought on the other side of the Appalachian Mountains as well. And if you remember back to the assignment from last week, where I had you look at the different Union armies, there was not just one Union army. There were different Union armies, different units that were stationed around the country. And a lot of these units were kind of based off of the rivers. So there was the Army of the Ohio, which was to try to take over the Ohio River Valley. There was the Army of the Cumberland, which was trying to take over the Cumberland River Valley. There was the Army of the Tennessee, which was trying to take over the Tennessee River Valley. And then there was the Army of the Mississippi eventually to try to take over the Mississippi River Valley. There's an Army of the Shenandoah, which is up here, and then obviously the Army of the Potomac, which is the main ones that we've been talking about in a lot of the battles so far. So again, not just one army, several different places around the country. And the first mass battle that is going to take place out in the West is going to be at a place called Shiloh. And Shiloh is going to be the battle to control who is in command of the Tennessee River Valley. So Shiloh is this brutal fight in 1862, in April of 1862. And it takes place in the woods. It's not right out in the open. And it's to see if the Union can control the Tennessee River Valley. And on the first day of fighting, the Confederates do very well. And the Confederates actually attack and back the Union up all the way to the river. And it seems like even a good part of the Union might have to surrender. But that night, they get a whole second army, a second unit, to come and reinforce them that land at the wharf. And they're able to come reinforce and then attack, counter the next morning and force the Confederates to retreat. So this Battle of Shiloh actually, at the start, is the bloodiest battle in the war, because Antietam isn't for a couple months later. And it really devastates both sides and makes them realize how bad this fighting is going to be, because almost for every single soldier out here, this was their first taste of combat. And here's the Battle of Shiloh. The Union Army is backed up against this river, Tennessee River, and you can see here they're fighting, and then the first day they go back. The second day, they're able to counterattack. The Confederate commander is a guy by the name of Albert Sidney Johnston, and for the Confederates, this is a big loss because in the first afternoon of the battle, he gets shot in the leg. And at first, he still stays up in his horse, and they don't really know what's going on. And then they see the blood just start to gush out of his boot and from around it, and they realize that he had cut his femoral artery. And he basically passes out, and he dies right there. And what they do is they actually try to hide the body from his men, so that way they thought they would be discouraged if they realized, oh, crap, here's your commander dead. He just bled out from his leg. So that way they wouldn't get too discouraged. The Union also have some of their generals get shot in this Battle of Shiloh.
Here's the Union line defending the
guy, William Wallace, who is, it's actually kind of sad because his wife was on the battlefield and eventually was able to care for him before he passed. But he gets shot here leading a charge as well. It's like I told you, you can see all the foliage and all the woods that took place in this Battle of Shiloh. It made it a lot harder to figure out what was going on, and there was a lot of chaos. And there he goes. So he got shot. The actor's being very dramatic. So, after the Battle of Shiloh, the Union slowly start to take a lot of these river valleys. And we had talked in another video about this thing called the Anaconda, where they had blockaded all the way around from the Atlantic Ocean. They had gone in for some of these rivers as well. And they're trying to now choke off the last big waterway. And the last big waterway is the Mississippi. But as they start to come together, there still is this little red line. So they're coming up this way and they're going down this way, but there's still a part of the river that's controlled by the Confederates. And as long as that little section is there, the Union won't have free access. And there's a giant city there called Vicksburg, which is the last big holdout on the Mississippi River. And there's going to be a 2-month-long siege for the Union to control the Mississippi River at the Battle of Vicksburg. And they're going to use some really heavy cannon and heavy artillery you see in the pictures here. Never before used in land battles in North America. But they're trying to defeat back this fortress. Vicksburg sits high up on a hill with the river surrounding it, and it looks very imposing. There was a courthouse up there that you could see from miles away, and they had been entrenched up there for the last couple of years, and the Union are going to have to kind of sneak around it. So what the Union do is they sneak all the way around. They go along this left side of the river, and then they come all the way around on the right side, and then they try to come at it from the front. They started landing right in front of the town, which would have been exposed them to the deadly fire from the fortress. They kind of do this end run around, and then they form a siege line, and they basically trap them in there. And over 2 months, they're able to knock them away. You can see here the Union have forces all around the city of Vicksburg. There's not that many soldiers. You compare the little lines to show how many Confederate soldiers to the Union. And this is the big courthouse, which sat way up on the bluff. And eventually, the Union are able to win on the 4th of July, haul down the Confederate flag, and put up the American flag. And then some of the battles, like to get up there, was like in this very swampy terrain around Mississippi here. So what you notice is the Union is doing pretty good out west. They won the Battle of Shiloh. They won the Battle of Vicksburg. They control the Mississippi River. They control the Tennessee River. They control the Ohio River. Who is doing that? Well, this guy, Ulysses S. Grant. He is the guy that's doing all that. He is the general out west. And he was very much a modest kind of man of the people. He hated to wear his dress swords. He hated to wear his dress uniforms. They said his uniform was always caked in mud and dirt. A lot of times in these pictures, you just see this guy in like this regular old hat standing against a tree, and it's like, oh wait, he's the commander of their whole army. He's not like riding a big horse mounted into battle. But he was very smart, and he realized, you know what? The number one thing in this war is that we have more men than they do. It's simple. There's nothing else more to it. The Union have more men. We just attack. We force them on the run. We'll win. And Lincoln is going to bring him over to be the commander against Robert E. Lee in the East. He tried all these different commanders. They all sucked. And now he's going to bring him over from the West to the East to be the new commander. And here in this TV movie,
Still need a hell of a leather, General. We can't go on this way, savaging each other to make more widows and orphans.
This is supposed to be Lincoln.
Ulysses Grant sound likely. Yes, sir. I know him well. He was 2 years ahead of me at West Point. He told Buckner at Fort Donelson that he'd accept no terms but unconditional surrender. When I heard that, I knew I'd found a man I could talk to. There will be opposition to him if you choose him, sir. Because he drinks? I don't believe it. But he was rumored to have been drunk at Shiloh. And he carried the day. George, I'm going to watch him. Grant may be the commander I need, a man who can exploit the Confederacy's weaknesses and force them to the wall.
So you see here the character played by Lincoln, he's saying, I don't care if he drinks, I don't care, whatever, I just care that he attacks. And that's the general he's going to bring in. So Grant is going to go out west, go out east to now fight Lee. He's going to come from the west, he's going to go over to the east, and he's going to fight Lee. And they're going to have a series of battles, 1, 2, 3 in a row, in May of 1864. This is called the Overland Campaign. And the first battle is going to take place in the woods. And they literally call it the Battle of the Wilderness. And it's just this nasty, dense foliage area. And when they start firing at each other, they just kind of run into each other. And you can't really use the cannons in there. And when they do use some of the heavier guns, they set fire to the trees by accident. So some people actually ended up getting burned to death in the Battle of the Wilderness. You couldn't easily get the bodies out of there either and help the wounded because you couldn't tell who controlled what area. And it just became very chaotic. You see it here in this glorified painting, like Grant coming in with like the fire raging in the background. But this was his first battle leading the troops out there, and it changes the dynamics of things. And he keeps going. He doesn't stop after the Wilderness. A couple days later, he goes to this battle called Spotsylvania. He doesn't wait up. He doesn't let Lee have time another month or 2 months or 3 months to regroup. He just says, okay, 2 days, 3 days later, let's go. Here's another battle. And this one's called Spotsylvania. At this Battle of Spotsylvania, the Confederates had dug in behind this thing they called a mule shoe. And at this mule shoe, there was like an angle that jutted out, and they called it the Bloody Angle. Because over this 24-hour period, the Union kept attacking this one little jut out of the Confederate forces. And the Confederates were dug in, and then it started to rain. And so you had these men coming at each other. They do like a video. This is like a video game simulation of this battle at Spotsylvania. And it's just ridiculous because they're so close quarters. They're using hand-to-hand combat. They're slipping on the mud that was part of the barricades. And then the mud is being interspersed with blood. And there were talks that there were 4 or 5 bodies deep, sometimes climbing over each other's bodies to have this horrific fight at Spotsylvania. Not a pleasant place to be. They said in the entire war, the angle at Spotsylvania was probably the most hell on earth, a place you would never want to be. Finally, and then you noticed, like, this is a tree that's actually in the Smithsonian Museum that's been destroyed so much by so many bullets and so many shells. This is a giant oak tree that had been there for 100-some years and just obliterated in one day. And these are some of the bodies at Spotsylvania. This is the barricade that the Confederates had set up, and there's some of the bodies left over after the battle's done. And then finally, he's going to keep going, and he's going to go to another place called ColdHarbor. And a couple days later, the Union attack at ColdHarbor. And again, Grant has a lot of his soldiers die. In these 3 battles here, 55,000 Union soldiers have casualties compared to 35,000 for the Confederate. But he realizes, you know what, we got more men to spare than they do. They lose 35,000, they don't have that many to replace them with. We got plenty back in some of the northern states. So he just says, we just keep attacking, keep fighting, keep going. And so, yes, the Union do a lot of these frontal assaults, and yes, a ton of them die. And people say Grant's a butcher. People say he's just risking his own men's lives for nothing. But he does get victories. He keeps moving, he keeps going forward. And they get closer and closer and closer to the capital of the Confederacy, which is Richmond. So in the map here, you see he started out here, and a month later, he's all the way down here. So look at all the ground he's covered in that time period. So the last note for today is these battles called Wilderness, Spotsylvania, and Cold Harbor. They're 3 bloody fights in 1 month. And Grant and Lee both are criticized for being butchers, that they're just throwing tens of thousands of men into fight day after day after day, not allowing time to regroup, not even thinking about the tactics, just trying to see on a pure size level how many people can we get into the fight, and that'll determine who wins. And in the end, the Union is going to come out better on that because they just simply have more men in reserve. So by the summer of 1864, the Union is pretty close to the Confederate capital. They're pretty far into Virginia. Now, the Confederates have not given up yet. There's still another bloody year to go. But that's where we're living off for today.